Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina Smarecki, and I'm the events manager here at Newspire. I'll be your host for this live session today. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, Newspire and Cybereason are partnered together to deliver an industry-leading solution that allows us to defeat ransomware. We are super excited to be here together today with some really great content to share with you all. In celebration of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we will be giving away 5 $50 gift cards to 1Password Password Manager subscription. So make sure you watch your email inbox for an email from me, as I'll be notifying the winners after the event via email. So it is time to get started with today's webinar, which is centered around Cybersecurity Awareness Month and what we've learned from 2021 ransomware attacks. If you have questions throughout today's session, please go ahead and pop them into the questions tab on the right side of your screen. I'll be collecting those and we can address them all at the end. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our thought leaders today. J.R. Cunningham is the Chief Security Officer here at Newspire. J.R. will be joined by Sam Curry, the Chief Security Officer from Cybereason, and Jerry Wynn. Jerry is the Director of Threat Intelligence and Rapid Response here at Newspire. And now I'll turn it over to our speakers.
Hey, thank you so much, Gina. And Sam, Jerry, great to be with you. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's always a pleasure to be able to participate with fellow practitioners and folks who are passionate about improving the security posture of our customers and making the industry a better place. What we thought we'd do today, and we're going to make this kind of conversational amongst the three of us, and for everybody on the live webinar, please feel free to submit questions as we go along, and we'll get to them at the end. We'd like to talk about, just in general, why this is important that we do this. And we'd like to share a little bit about what we learned in 2021 regarding ransomware. Unpack a little bit about why ransomware continues to be successful. We got some stats to share with you. Make some predictions about where we think some of this is going in the future. Sam is going to spend some time talking about some of the real world successes that the Cybereason team and our partnership have had throughout this year. And then finally, some of the things that we think are the best protections and prevention actions that you can take to prevent successful ransomware, and then we'll get to Q&A. James Scott, who is a fantastic practitioner, he's over at the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology, had these two quotes and really wanted to share them with you in that, they really explore the idea that this is still a very human-oriented problem space in our industry. And when we talk through this, we're going to talk a lot about technology and some of the things that we've seen be successful regarding defeating the ransomware threat. But at the end of the day, all that technology is really centered around trying to protect people and trying to mitigate some of the human factors involved in ransomware. One of the most compelling things about these quotes is that Mr. Scott makes the comment that ransomware requires the victim to become a willing accomplice after the fact, and that's a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of us. So hopefully as we go through this today, we find some goodness in all of this and some ability to really help you and your stakeholders avoid this problem. So why is it important that we do this? I won't reach into the bullets, but Cybersecurity Awareness Month really is a spot for us to pause, maybe not stop firefighting, but take the opportunity to engage with non-security stakeholders in our organizations, educate them on the top of mind issues of the day, talk a little bit about how they can protect themselves personally. And, I think when I look at folks who aren't native security practitioners, they have a lot of questions, and this stuff changes so frequently. We weren't talking about ransomware as part of cybersecurity awareness 5 years ago. We were talking about, other kind of top of mind topics. So October is a great opportunity. And Sam, Jerry, as we cap, Cybersecurity Awareness Month off, any thoughts or reflections on, what the month has meant to you? Anything cool that you did that you'd like to share as practitioners?
Sure thing, JR. Thank you. So, I see this list of important cybersecurity awareness highlights here, especially in the month of October. We always talk about, be more vigilant, or how to be more vigilant, or how as cybersecurity professionals we could do X, Y, Z better. But one of the things I always like to bring up is, how do we provide more opportunities, especially since it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, how do we provide more opportunities for folks to get into our industry? We talk about the shortage of talent, the talent gaps, etc. I always like to bring up, how do you get into this industry? And that should always be part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We've done a lot of good initiatives, during reach outs, the colleges, the employee fairs, things like that. So that's my little takeaway from Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Beyond the let's do XYZ better, let's include the human element. Let's get more people into cyber.
Yeah, I gotta agree with Jerry there. I'm part of an organization called Hacking into Cybersecurity, and it's not so much about how to help people already on the path get in, although that's important, because it seems like the first rung on the ladder is 5 or 6 feet up. Word to the wise: if you're in cyber, really re-examine what your prerequisites are for people in the job. Do you need somebody for an entry-level job with 3 years of experience, for instance? But it's about the diversity angle. It's also about neurodiversity. It's getting people from other backgrounds in. I would be remiss if I didn't say it is a chance to revisit cyber literacy, but not the boring, the 1 hour all hands meeting where everyone's going to sleep. Hopefully you didn't experience that and it got peppered throughout the month, but it's also a chance to extend a carrot, not just a stick, for cyber, to refresh the message. Because in the end, we're still seeing the same numbers. Phishing is still the number one avenue. Right. It's not like more awareness is just going to solve that. So rather than, yes, you have to get out the annual message, but there's so much more we could be doing. And you asked for a highlight. I was privileged to take part in something called Share the Mic in Cyber, which amplifies the voices of Black practitioners. And I worked with a really wonderful guy who, at 26 years old, his name's Kamal Thomas, has done far more than I did at 26 than I did at 32. So have a look on Twitter and look him or me up. You'll see he's done some amazing things. He's going great places. But stuff like that's kind of inspiring, because it's not the same path for everyone. And hopefully we can extend a hand and help others up.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, the first rung being 5 to 6 feet higher. I always think it's on us as veterans of the industry to push that down a little bit, right? And you kind of really hit the nail on the head when you mentioned our job requirements. Funnily enough, last night I was reviewing a job application for one of my friends that is trying to get in, and this was for a SOC level 1 analyst position, and the requirement was a master's degree.
Yeah, it's a little much, isn't it? I mean,
right.
Right. I would encourage people to create a SOC level 0 position,
right.
And have. So we had somebody great apply for a job here at Cyberies, and she was a history major. She had got the taste for it, which is hard enough. We should be working on that. She came in as a customer success manager, and now she's in the SOC. And I don't want to call her out and embarrass her, but she's amazing. And that should be a more common story.
Right.
I have my bachelor's. I've even done an internship, and nobody will take a chance on me. That's tragic.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say my highlight is, and this continues to become more of a highlight every year, the general population knows more about cybersecurity than they ever did in the past. And 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I couldn't explain to my parents what I did with a PowerPoint presentation. And now our profession is in the news every day. So people are asking more questions around the profession. There's more interest, and it makes it a lot of fun when you're able to share, the profession with others. Hey, Jerry, part of your day-to-day life is, responding to incidents after they have occurred, and threat hunting and dissecting what happened, and of course the digital forensics and incident response. What did we learn from 2021?
Wow. My question back to you is, what didn't we learn? But in all honesty, the easy targets will continue to be favorite targets. And by easy targets, I don't mean you have a server out there the internet with remote desktop 3389 wide open. Yes, by definition, that's an easy target. But to me, the adversary is looking for an easy target that will pay, right? Meaning that if they did break in, which one of their victims are more than likely to pay? Critical infrastructure, as we saw this year, high-tech companies, managed service providers, telecom, hospitals, those are the types of targets that are more than willing to pay because they have to get back. They have to get back into operation. So I definitely, we saw that happen this year. I feel that it's going to continue to be favorite targets of the adversary. And then, when organizations do pay, there's always that stress level of, we paid, are they still going to release our data? Technically, if they still have the data, what's going to happen to that data? And that's becoming more and more of a concern, and sadly enough, more and more of a fact. We've seen this happen many times where a company pays, their data gets unencrypted, everything's fine and dandy, they get back to operation, and the next thing you know, their data is being sold on the dark web. And then finally, we're learning that insurance companies are taking a more active role in not only during the payout phase, but actually during the security program development phase, or before they even agree to pay out. They're now looking very deeply into your security program if there was negligence involved. I think I heard recently an organization went through a cyber insurance audit, if you will, and the audit turned out that there was 15 domain admins. Cyber insurance said, if you don't lower those admin accounts, we're not going to cover you. Right? It's getting to that level now because it's the crime wave is just so rampant that we have to start controlling things, and sadly not holding only the attackers accountable, but kind of holding the victims accountable as well. What could have they done, and why was it done?
Right. Sam, what do you think? What did we learn from 2021?
Yeah, no, I agree with Jerry on all that. Phenomenal points. But I would say that what really stood out, and it may seem self-evident now, but it probably wasn't before, is that ransomware is a business model. And
absolutely.
If you look at like 2019, we used the word epidemic a little prematurely then when we talked about ransomware hitting municipalities and starting to go into healthcare. 2020, it really took off. And in 2021, I think it went from maybe the beginning of 2020, it was a cottage industry. Now it's industrialized. Right. And this notion of ransomware as a service, I remember stories years ago when a consumer would be hit, which is who used to be targeted. And your quotes from James showed that too, right? But the consumer used to be targeted. And sometimes they would take mercy. They'd be like, oh, I hit a poor person, I'll give them back their data. That doesn't happen now because this ransomware as a service is the cultivation arm that offers up the victims to the ransomware gangs. But that's a monetizable thing. So 80% of those who've been harvested are then reattacked, not by the same organization, by another one. Even let's say a dark side. Let's say they don't attack you twice, but they really bought the lead, if you will, from a RAS organization, an affiliate program, they call it, who's going to go and sell that same lead to another organization. Why not? They make the money all over again.
Right.
I think there's a lesson here on your cyber insurance point, Jerry, that cyber insurance isn't enough. You've also got to improve the program. Not only will that eventually get you better rates one day when the actuarial tables mature, but having just cyber insurance is the equivalent of having life insurance but no health insurance. It's not a good strategy for living a long, good life, right?
Right.
Your family might love you for it, but not you, right?
That's a great point, Tim. I'm stealing that.
You should. Yeah, you can.
All right. So why ransomware? Sam brought up great points to really hammer these points home. Actually, for the bad people, the threat actors, it's lucrative. They're making so much money. I remember in 2008, maybe when scareware was running rampant. We all remember that fake AV. The bad people put bad things on a computer, sell you fake AV to take away that bad thing, and it was $25 a pop.
Mm-hmm.
Those actors were making six figures a week doing that. It was so lucrative that they actually set up 800 numbers for you to call in if you weren't happy with the product that they sold you, and they actually gave you refunds. That's how lucrative that was. Now we convert that to ransomware as a service today. I can't even imagine what the multiplier is, right? Millions of dollars, and then there's no consequences. The way they're getting paid out, there's no regulation around that, those currencies. New currencies pop up on a weekly basis or whatnot, and there's really no way to really stop it from happening. And finally, like we talked about earlier, victims have to pay. Imagine an OR stopping. We just can't have that, right? Like there's imagine a manufacturing line that produces one thing and one thing only, and that one thing generates $20 million a week for them. $200,000, they'll pay. They'll pay in a heartbeat.
Jerry, I find it really amazing, some of the statistics that came out of this year regarding that. One of them that jumps out regarding, organizations paying came from Sophos, and that was they surveyed just over 1,000 organizations that had been victimized by ransomware, and 96% of them got their data back. The overwhelming majority of them paid the ransom. And I get asked all the time, well, why do these people pay? And why do the bad guys decrypt? Very interesting to your point. Business, when you walk into the office and nothing's working, or the conveyor belt on the factory isn't working, you're in crisis mode immediately. But then on the flip side, the bad guys have also developed a little bit of honor among thieves and realized that the moment that they don't uphold their end of the deal, the whole ransomware industry comes to an end, because then no one will pay. And so, you do see that, the bad guys in a certain sense are keeping their side of the equation. COVID obviously accelerated a lot of this. You see these massive fee increases. I think the average was $5,000 in 2018. It's up over, I think, as of right now, it's even over $250,000, according to the National Security Institute. So the statistics are alarming, really, in how serious this problem has become. Sam, one of these stats that we put up here is from Cyber Reason, and I thought that was pretty interesting. You're bumping into cyber insurance companies only covering part of a ransomware event. Is that right?
Yeah. Let's just say that cyber insurance may not cover everything that you think it covers. That's probably the best way.
Great point.
Also, yeah, there's a ton of exclusions. And so, the ideal would be you get a good ratio of, the premium you pay to the dollars you potentially can claim. And ideally it would cover 100%. And there would be maybe 4 or 5 exclusions for things like, erroneous malpractice or that you were not acting in good faith or something like that. But no, some of them have pages and pages of things that basically allow outs. We had one very large insurance company, I won't name them here, who almost pulled from the reinsurance market and reinsurance of cyber and direct of cyber, but their constituents wouldn't allow them to. So the price of it's going up too. But, the money changing hands here is enormous. I remember blogging last year, I have a column on Forbes where there was a $15 million ransomware, and I had been asked by someone, is that the ceiling? And I blogged, I didn't think it was, and we've had a $50 million ransom now.
Wow.
And so, what's amazing is you look at someone like DarkSide, in a month and a half, they made $90 million, 90. And had they not stumbled across Colonial Gas, the drama that unfolded afterwards might have been very different, because they were just harvesting. I love Jerry's point about scamware. In fact, I used to, you can check my resume and figure out which company it was. I used to work for a company that was an antivirus company, and we used to supply SDKs to do antivirus. And most of the companies that came to talk to us, we had to validate that they weren't scamware in some way, because they were like, hey, one of them I can tell you, because they don't exist anymore, was 180 Solutions. They made a product called Zango. They had 20 million in their install base. They wanted to be seen as a benefit. I suspect that that ransomware is going to head to an area where there's actual quality support, because they do get the data back. 96% was from that report. The same report here that we did showed that 48% of those, there was partial loss of the data, because they don't have the QA right. They don't have the customer support right and service right, which is a horrific thing to say anyway. So I think we're going to see improvements of that in the near future. And I suspect the price point will settle down. One of the things you should not be doing is paying to make it go away, because you're just delaying when it becomes public.
Well, we're funding research and development at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's my thoughts on top of that. Yeah.
Great. So, where does this go, right? And Sam, I think your point around, the bad guys are going to continue to innovate. They're going to continue to improve the speed and efficacy of lateral movement. One point I'll make here is gone are the days where the cybersecurity practitioner can leave the office on Friday, turn the lights off, come back in on Monday and see what happened. Those days are over.
JR, I think those days have been over for years, my friend.
Yeah, it's the speed at which lateral movement occurs can render a company completely out of business in a matter of seconds or minutes. And so that's critical that, the technical defenses and security operations and the response side of the equation is there and fully functioning at all times. We're going to be having this debate around to pay or not to pay long into the future. I think even as to Sam's point, as rates settle, as our technology gets better for defeating ransomware, the security operations and automation techniques get better, we're still going to be having the debate on under what circumstances does an organization pay or not pay. The legal and insurance firms are going to become more stringent on advice and payout of claims. Very interesting. It used to be if you wanted cyber insurance, you would find a carrier, find a broker, they'd find a carrier, and you'd fill out an application for your policy, you'd get a price, they'd ask you maybe 4 or 5 questions. Now what we're seeing is the insurance companies have legitimate cybersecurity professionals who are asking really deep questions around what exists in the cyber program before they'll write the policy. So they're going to be more involved. We're also seeing cyber insurance companies mandate that you use their incident response provider. So we're seeing the insurance companies become way more involved in the prevention, the detection, and the response of ransomware events than they have been in the past. And I guess my final prediction here on the future is legislation and regulation of cryptocurrency as well as cybersecurity negligence, similar to what happened, if you remember, when like Enron collapsed and all of these accounting scandals broke out, and we found out that there was all kinds of fraud and negligence happening in the accounting and financial side of businesses. Sarbanes-Oxley was passed, really regulated responsibility and held individuals accountable. We're going to see something like that in the future. I certainly wouldn't predict it happening over the course of the next year, but the future is going to bring some sort of legislation around those two elements, crypto as well as cybersecurity accountability. I don't know, guys, other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Look, on the first point, to pay or not to pay, first of all, you can't in some circumstances. If it's a terrorist organization, for instance, so involve your lawyers early to know if you can. Secondly, you should be doing the calculation of when you would pay or not ahead of time. So having some business conversations about when do we pay versus when don't we. And I already said, don't pay just to make it go quiet. That's not going to do anything. But if you can avoid paying without suffering an existential crisis and failure, then do so. And pay attention to the changes in the laws and regulations that you just called out, JR, because it may become illegal in the future because it is feeding a criminal ecosystem. I do want to add a technical prediction, by the way, because we've just seen, we saw ransomware. Then we saw supply chain attacks at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, but we saw them combined in Kaseya. And so that tells me they will use whatever the best tools are and fast. They have quick R&D iteration, high quality code going out, which we never used to say about ransomware or any form of X-way, right? And so expect them to be innovating. and expect them to become subtler, more, to build a library of ways to get in that don't depend on human beings. They're still phishing, of course, but looking for the building vulnerabilities and call it negative day knowledge, right? Before anybody knows those things are being exploited. Jerry, do you have anything?
I do on the legislation side, going back to pay or not to pay as well. I did a research paper on cybersecurity and ransomware a few months ago, and I came across, of course, I don't have my notes in front of me, but there was a researcher that compared ransomware to the kidnapping crises in the 1960s, I believe, in Italy, when the mafia was kidnapping people and demanding ransom. The Italian government made it illegal for insurance companies to pay out that, and kidnapping stopped overnight. So I always, pose this thing, and JR's heard me pose this before, is I always wonder if that should be a thing here in the US.
Yeah,
it's an interesting point.
There is a trade-off, like you're committing a very big and personal crime when you kidnap a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a strong chance of getting caught. As opposed to ransomware, it's big, but it seems like there's a keyboard between the practitioner and the victim,
Right.
And a much lower chance of getting caught. So I don't know if it would stop, but it might bring the prices down. I know that'll happen. The question is if it goes to zero or not.
Right.
Hey, Sam, if you would talk to us a little bit about some of the successes in detection and response, as well as what you're doing at Cyber Reason to kind of flip the tables around a little bit on the bad guys.
Yeah, I think before diving into these 2 points, I just want to set a little bit of the stage. It's interesting to use the word detection, words detection and response, because historically the perception of something like EDR or even network detection or XDR, which is now emerging, the perception is, when prevention fails, we're going to detect. Right. So it's preventable, catch what's after, and that's true. But let's break ransomware down into 2 components. I almost prefer the term ransom ops as a descriptive term. It has a delivery mechanism and a payload. And the delivery mechanism uses the old APT and advanced attack techniques. So when you try to detect it more to the left in the kill chain or in the attack cycle, if you use MITRE ATT&CK or whatever, in the journey as they penetrate a network, you're trying to catch them sooner to prevent the detonation. Now, if a company gets hit on a machine or two, it's annoying, but you re-image the system, you check and see if anything's important left, you end the incident and some learnings. The real fear is that they will spread through the network without being detected, plant ransomware everywhere, and detonate simultaneously at a time of their choosing. That's the equivalent of just taking out the business and in one fell swoop. And now you're in a terrible situation. You might not even be able to coordinate a response at that point. So I think focusing on doing the detection faster, not just on prevention. Yeah, I still believe in prevent the preventable. One of my colleagues in the industry and a former competitor used to say that he didn't believe in detection and response 5 years ago because he's not a garbage man, is what he said. I said, well, in my entire time in the industry, there has never been a solution that could 100% block anything.
Right.
And so the fact that it's consistently being beaten, even if you get it down to 99.9%, you've still got to have that detection. But the point is prevent the preventable and do that, but focus further to the left. I mean, if we ever get to zero again, it'll be time to go predictive. It'll be time to start trying to figure out where they're going to go. And the best example I've seen is a client who was able to block and eliminate ransomware really in transition. They didn't even suffer from seeing the payload because by the time it would have gotten there, they had owned their own network. If you own the network and you can take it back, the detonation is either limited or doesn't happen at all. Which brings us to indicators of behavior, by the way. So this is vendor neutral. Some of you may be familiar with indicators of compromise. Indicators of compromise are things like the lowest level hashes and domain names and IP addresses. But as you get higher and you get into tools and you get into TTPs, you get to the activities of the bad guys, that's expensive to get. It is the most valuable stuff and has the most persistence. Like it's useful for a long time, as opposed to hashes. Sometimes the hash for a tool changes from system to system in the same attack chain. So what we really need is to start to develop, and if you know David Bianco's work, you can do a little Google search on it. He came up with the pyramid of pain. Getting to the top of the pyramid of pain, getting to the TTPs, that's the thing. That's what we're trying to do here. So indicators of behavior is coming up with a language for describing these types of things. So if a process spawns a process in some user context, or it injects to a process, spawning a process, you're in Outlook and you launch Excel. Injection is you're in Outlook and it injects a URL over to Safari or Explorer, what have you. That's stuff that could be benign, it could be bad, but having a descriptive language for it means we can start to look for chains of these things. And really, we have a problem in security. We tend to focus on the moment and go, is this good or bad? If we say it's good and we're wrong, the company's dead. And if we say it's bad and we're wrong, the CIO is mad with you, right? Because things have broken. Right? So what we want to do, if you look at the attack matrix, one of the techniques in there is called ping. Look, that sounds ridiculous because we're thinking, how do I make a decision in the moment? This link in the chain. But ping can be used good or bad. What matters is what happened before and after. So having a way of capturing behavior and being able to link them up lets us look for the chains of attacks. You can catch it on the second link or the third link when you sometimes can't catch it on the link you're examining. And of course, how it's done will depend on different vendors, how we do it versus a network competitor or somebody else in the space, a SIM company, that kind of thing. That state of the art needs to be advanced. And actually, if you can go to the next slide, that's what's happening right now. I'll give you an example. By the way, it's happening in Oasis in the OCA group. But here's a recent supply chain attack and ransomware that were combined. Application gets an update, meaning it is what it was expected. It sideloaded a DLL. That could be good, could be bad, but it waited a couple of weeks and then called out. Now, if at that point you spotted that a DGA, domain generation algorithm, was used, you could color the chain right away, but let's say you didn't. Then it pulled a file, that could be good. It executed a file, that could be good. Change of privilege, lateral communications. There isn't a practitioner, watching this that wouldn't think that chain should be determined to be bad at a point. And so we get to, so if you go to the next slide, we'll get to, so what are indicators of behavior? I saw this meme the other day. Someone was sitting at a table with a sign that said, behavioral detection is just correlation, prove me wrong. And I'm like, actually, you're wrong. It should be a type of telemetry, right? Yeah, you can do correlation, you can do anomaly detection and statistical analysis, and you can do behavioral detection. All that's possible, but the telemetry itself is what's different. And so what we really want to do is come up with a query language. It's a lot like Yara is to IOCs, but it should be able to take behavior from any source, and it should be able to express complex behaviors. So when the next Kaseya comes out, right, or dark side attack, we can say, here's what their behavior looks in their lateral movement or the development of a kill chain. Here's what Fin7 looks like, or Carbonac looks like, or any of those. And it should be shareable, and above all, it should be vendor neutral. So again, that's Oasis is where we're pushing that with some of our competitors in the OCA working group. So
I think it's great, Sam, that Cyber Reason has kind of taken the lead in trying to create a universal language, especially around context. And I think we saw what that did for common vulnerabilities. The CVE database changed the world with regards to vulnerability management. Oasis has changed the world, and so this is it's really great to see this change coming about. And by the way, I think we've matured as an industry enough to know that we have to help each other out. The competition are really, really bad enemy actors. They're not, the other product company down the street or the other managed security services provider down the street. So, that's fantastic. I get asked all the time, what are the most common things that an organization can do that are effective at preventing ransomware? And it's very interesting. I'm a cyber practitioner, have been for a long time, and my head immediately goes to what's the latest widget. But when we go back retroactively and look at different organizations that have successfully thwarted cyber attacks and mitigated the damage, it really comes down to kind of back to basics. There's some security 101 fundamentals that if they're an effective part of the program, go a long way on the prevention side. And I have to say, Sam, I totally agree with your point about let's prevent the preventable, and then let's do the really interesting stuff. Once something bad happens, and we need to invoke the detection and response component. When we look purely at prevention, endpoint security is critical, especially in the era of, if you think about it, all of these devices were, locked up behind corporate networks with all kinds of robust defenses and secure wireless and IPS systems. And what did we do last year? We sent them all home and put them behind $49.99, Linksys routers and called it good. So, endpoint protection and patching continues to be critically important. Good web and email security. Those are defenses that largely disappeared when we sent folks home. And they're still critical parts, especially things like URL rewriting and blocking, known phishing sites and outbound command and control, et cetera. On the human side, financial controls, good financial processes to mitigate the risk of wire transfer fraud, additional verifications for banking access. The bad guys sometimes take a break from technology and just pick up the phone and make magic happen for themselves. And some of these financial controls go a long way in mitigating that risk. And then, multi-factor authentication, both at work and at home, especially for those privileged users. Like, that seems like 4 really basic, boring things in our industry, but they really do go a long way towards mitigating some of this risk.
Absolutely agree, JR. When I respond to ransomware investigations, this is the question folks always ask. It's like, how could we have prevented this? Or how do we prevent this from happening in the future? And I kind of stare back in an odd way. It's already happened, right? The lesson here for us to ask ourselves, as me being a part of the investigation and hopefully being a good security partner, is how do you recover faster?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, you could get recovery down to 0.
Right?
Right.
But for IP loss. And
yeah, because all of these things are great and low-hanging fruit, preventing the preventable, but the things that we can't prevent are going to happen. And I always ask that question, like, let's really think about how to recover faster. And in this ransomware investigation that we just went through together, you didn't have backups. Let's talk about that.
Right. What knobs or dials do we need to turn in the program in order to, make it better, right?
Right.
And to Sam's earlier point, they're coming back. So when we have an event like this occur, making life better quickly is very important in a security program.
By the way, I would caution against automated recovery.
Yes.
Because that can be triggered by bad guys and they might be stealing something in that window. So you should make sure you're still doing forensics and improving your processes. But I'd like to add 2 things here. I loved your point on home. I think we're going to see now some new attack types developed specifically for home automation, ancient routers, old printers, those things. And I think we're also going to see, we're going to see that could be an opportunity. Anybody who's listening, you could do a business in last mile security and ergonomics and IT support. So, for a company to support instead 100 people in an office, now 100 homes, you could probably make a really good business model for a fraction of the floor space cost to go around and secure those spaces. But the other thing that is, I want to build on your backup point, business prep. You should be having a conversation with your board and saying, this could happen. When it does, what are we doing? How are we paying? Are we not paying? Under what conditions would we? And who do we call? And then tabletop it. You don't have to tabletop it with the board, but tabletop it with the people who are going to be on point in the crisis, because most CISOs would be surprised to find out they're not the star of that show.
Right.
Because my experience when there's a breach, and I've been in a couple, and as opposed to doing consulting to them, is that the CEO suddenly cares, and the general counsel and the chairman of the board, and when they convene it, you are the lowest ranked person in that room. You go from the person holding the bag and probably the blame to the person who's now advising people making risk decisions without the right knowledge. Get that out of the way ahead of time.
Right. Absolutely agree.
Yeah. So
if you haven't, if you're a CISO and you haven't met your board before the incident occurs, time to polish up the resume.
So true.
Okay, real quick, let's talk about predictions for 2022. So, Sam, why don't you kick us off? We the three of us kind of took a little bit of a different angle on our 2022 predictions. So,
yeah, we already did a few predictions actually. So in addition to those, I see a world where there's a lot more nation states, and the states that already do it more, leaning on their cyber and evolving their toolkit. They stockpile three things: delivery mechanisms, payloads, and network assets that they can later use for things like giant DDoS cannons or to hold people hostage. I think cybercrime is going to keep growing, and it's going to use that toolkit. What we see is something gets developed in a national lab somewhere, and either through leakage, selling, or outright release, it becomes a toolkit available to an enormous ecosystem. And the lines are getting extremely blurred between actors. We almost have privateers in some cases, as with Russia, right? So a lot of those organizations are more than subtly encouraged in this sort of nation state ignored or state ignored ransomware. But also, I think cyber terrorists potentially come on the scene. Cyber terrorism, now that Afghanistan is in flux, organizations like ISIS and Al Qaeda have historically had what they call keyboard warriors. The Taliban might get in on that, and they have a border and a defense pact with places like Pakistan, and now growing relationship with China. The cyber toolkit can move. More supply chain and ransomware attacks. It's working. I mean, it is. And as we roll out new tech, we are improving the human experience to some degree, right? I want a house that knows me and turns the right music and mood lighting on and doors open and close properly. I'd love that, but I don't want it to be compromised and used to get me. So I think as we see flooding of IoT, IIoT, OT, and even autonomous systems like cars and drones, the world gets a more dangerous place at the same time. So I think we're going to see some of that I'd say 2022 plus. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the defender side of the house, I think we hammered home on a few of these already, but something I'd like to add, and two things I'd like to add to this, and I saw it on LinkedIn, which is, I'm really on LinkedIn. So this was kind of a eye opener for me. The bad guys get free training. Let's agree to that, right? They get free training. Pen testing 101 is out there. All kinds of great resources for offensive operations are free. Why do we pay for defensive operations training? Why do we have to pay a firewall vendor to get trained on using that firewall? Right? We as an industry need to change that. I think that's something, a good force to get behind and change that and make that a thing in 2022. The second one is really trailing off that. I saw this on LinkedIn as well. Bad guys don't have cert requirements or degree requirements. Huh. So why do we
40? Yeah.
Right? So why do we hammer home on those requirements so much when we're looking for SOC analysts, when we're looking for folks trying to get into this industry to become a defender to address a talent gap? So as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, right? About training, getting people into our industry. Selfishly, I'm tired. But on a serious note, I think my 2022 prediction is we will get more talent, and it's up to us to elevate that talent.
That's great, Jerry, and certainly, I think back to Sam's earlier point. The more we can do to elevate, how aggressively we pursue encouraging women, minorities, non-security practitioners to get into this space, the faster we're going to close this talent gap. We're 2 million plus short in our industry, and we've got a lot of work.
Neurodiverse.
Yeah,
too.
Absolutely. When I look at where I think things are going in 2022, we are going to see a more robust regulatory environment and more government involvement in this problem. The two big critical infrastructure breaches that we saw this summer and fall, really, you start to see the national conversation waking up, much in the same way it did with breach notification a decade and a half ago, or privacy, 5 years ago. We're going to see more of that. I think we're also going to see a liability shift to a certain degree, where vendors are going to be, whether they provide a service or a product, are going to be held more accountable for the failure of those products. To date, we have not seen, if you use the equivalent for the automotive industry, we've seen scenarios where if the airbags aren't working properly, the automakers will go after the airbag manufacturer. We've yet to see that in cyber, where when controls fail, the buyer holds the provider of that control accountable. So I think there will be a certain degree of liability shift happening here. We're going to see confidence issues in the cyber insurance industry. The cyber carriers are getting much smarter. They're taking more control of the decisions that are made in this industry. By the way, net, I think that's probably a good thing. But I think what we're going to see is on the buyer side, we're going to see less confidence that cyber insurance is the totality of the answer. I think waning are the days where a corporate executive can say, I'll just insure against that risk and everything is going to be fine. It's really not going to be the case in the future. And finally, consolidation all the way around. And these kind of last 2 points, we're seeing big consolidation in the security services market. We're seeing big consolidation in the security products market. I think we're going to see big consolidation in the ransomware as a service market. Sam made a comment earlier. These are businesses. These are sophisticated corporate enterprises, often with very blurry lines between government and the private sector, if you will. And they're going to look to maximize efficiencies and profit, especially as we get more aggressive in thwarting the bad guys as well as chasing them down, as we've seen, federal law enforcement do more aggressively this year than they ever have in the past. So consolidation all the way around, I think, is going to be a theme of 2022. Gina, I think we're ready for Q&A. I'll pass it back to you. Guys, I just want to say thank you so much for participating in this with me. Your feedback and your opinions are so industry relevant and important, and I really appreciate the three of us being able to get together and do this.
I do too. Thanks for having us, man. It's been
yeah,
great.
It's a good time. It was fun. Always fun.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. That was a great discussion. Such a complex and evolving topic. I could just keep listening to all your banter and stories. I'm hoping everyone else on the call agrees, and I wish we had more time here today. But we will move into the Q&A session here, and stick around if anyone has any questions. Just go ahead and pop them into the questions tab there. But I will get started with a question for Jerry. So you mentioned telecom, IT companies, and critical infrastructure being top targets. Do you see that changing in 2022?
I don't. Kind of going back to our discussion points earlier, as long as those types of organizations, I'll even throw in healthcare in 2022, they have to right now in the juncture of our industry, where the victims industries are at. Yes, absolutely, that trend will continue. Because the bad guys know it. They know who's going to pay, and those industries are more than likely going to pay.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. And question number 2 is for Sam.
Sure.
So in the future of shared indicators of behavior, much as we share common vulnerabilities and exploits today, what's the biggest hurdle to get there?
I think, look, there's 2 ways that's, because I alluded to a standard earlier, there's 2 ways that standards happen. One is de facto, meaning somebody with enough market share or an alliance with enough market share has the clout to just make it happen. That tends to be not very inclusive, and it tends to have a lot of baggage with it. The other way is de jure. In other words, we get together and we sit down like adults and we negotiate it. That can be tough. That's a challenge, but it is actually the best way to do it, which is why we're going through OASIS. It worked with something like SAML. It didn't work with something like SPML, for those of you who remember that. Sure. Right? So I think some of the obstacles are getting people who sit across the table from each other and fight over security business to sit down together from services side and product side and different product types. And the best thing about indicators of behavior is you don't have to get perfect. You just have to start collecting some behaviors and let the state of the art behind the scenes happen. So I almost think of it like a communications protocol, or rather, I refer to it as telemetry, and a query language. And I think we can get that done, but it's going to take people listening today, and it's going to take a big ecosystem. Start to ask your vendors, do you support indicators of behavior? Would you consider it? We were interested in interoperability among all of our products to do that. I hope that answers it.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you, David, Nick, and Paul, for your very nice comments there in the chat. We appreciate you being here today and your comments there. One last question. This one should go to JR. So, what can I do to convince my insurance provider that I should be covered from ransomware?
Oh, it's a great question. I'll share with you kind of some of my personal experience in this regard. Proving to the carrier that you have a well thought out cybersecurity program goes a very long way. You don't have to be perfect. I like to say that in the cybersecurity industry, there are only about 200 or so things, depending upon how you categorize controls. There are only about 200 or so things that you can do in a cybersecurity program. Most organizations are only going to be good at maybe a dozen of those things. And they're only going to be really good at maybe a handful of them. And so proving to the carriers why you made decisions, why you took risk and threat into account to pursue maturity, why you made a decision on where to spend the next dollar goes a long way in assuring the carrier that you're paying attention to the program. Where we get into trouble with the insurance carriers is when they hand us a questionnaire and we grade ourselves with, I'm kind of okay at this and okay at this and okay at this, and this one's not applicable, and I'm okay here and okay here. And we don't actually demonstrate that based on the business that I'm in and based on who the bad guys are that are going to go after me, I've paid attention to these following controls. By the way, some of them are those back to basics things. Jerry mentioned one of them. Insurance companies are starting to pay attention to how many privileged users an organization has and making sure that, some of those housekeeping things are taken care of. So I think the important thing is there's no universal excellent security program. An excellent security program is the one that works for your business. Being able to prove that to the insurance carriers goes a long way. I also would throw out there changing the language a little bit. And when those questionnaires come in, sitting down with the carrier or the broker or whomever expects you to answer those questions and walking through with them the story of your program, the story of your business, what you do, it takes it out of black and white. And, this is not a black and white industry. There is a lot of gray in why we make the decisions we make in cyber, and explaining that to the insurance providers, I think goes a long way in providing confidence for them as well.
All right. Thank you, JR. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions for us. Todd, I saw your question, and if anyone did miss part of the presentation, you will all receive a follow-up email. So just watch for that link in your email if you missed part of it. If anyone has any other questions, I don't have any other questions at the time. So please email us at webinars@newspire.com or go ahead and contact us through our website if you need more information. And we'll go ahead and direct any of your inquiries to the correct person. On behalf of Newspire, Cyber Reason, and our presenters, I want to thank everyone for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,